Hello, everyone. This is the 122nd episode of the Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog. Unfortunately, Mr. Paul Whittle from the 1888 Letter blog could not make it this time. For this episode, I interview author and freelance football soccer writer Mr. George Tsitsonis as we discuss his book, Achieving the Impossible, the remarkable story of Greece's Euro 2004 victory. This book chronicles the adventure of the Greek national team during the 2004 Euros. Mr. Tsitsonis has also written for FourFourTwo Magazine, FIFA Publications, 442.com, Soccer International Magazine, Inside Soccer Magazine, and Inside Football, among others. Welcome, George. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Sean. Great to be here. Really looking forward to it. So appreciate it.
Can you please introduce yourself and your trajectory into football?
I'm a Greek-American soccer/football writer. I began kind of doing freelance work back in 2002. Was the kind of first contributor to 442. They used to have a section in the back of the magazine with kind of little write-ups of each country every month. So I was the first Greek person. I just kind of sent out a random email to a man named Steve Bidmead back then, just kind of hoping to get a foothold somewhere. And for some reason, he responded to me, and everything kind of started from there. So I did a little bit of work for 442 for a couple of years, both in the kind of monthly Greek Super League / just kind of general Greek football reporting. Some stories as well. I was able to interview Christian Karimbe from former France International, amongst others. Just kind of, he had played for Olympiakos for a couple seasons. So just trying to kind of string together a few stories about the Greek game, maybe things that most fans were not. So after that, I was able to kind of transition and do some work for FIFA magazine, and then a host of different outlets, both print and online. I'm really always kind of specializing in the Greek game, trying to bring a little bit of coverage to places that maybe didn't traditionally cover Greek football. Obviously, the 2004 kind of bring Greek football to a little bit more prominence, a little bit more interest in those stories. So that certainly helped kind of my work as a freelancer. And after a while, we got to the point where I was interested in maybe doing some larger pieces, and that ended up kind of culminating in Achieving the Impossible, the book that came out 4 years ago.
What sparked your interest to write about this topic? Because I imagine it's probably the first book in English, right?
That's correct. It's the first book that's come out in English. One has come out since, and my hope is that hopefully more books will on this subject on Greek football will emerge in the years to come. But it was back in about 2017, and it was just innocent enough. I was sitting out on the back patio with my kids. It was close to the 4th of July, a big Independence Day holiday here in the United States, but also the anniversary. It was 13 years then of Greece winning the Euros. So, my kids at that point were 10 and 7. And so just kind of like as the old dad kind of does, I put my feet back and kind of started talking about that story. And they were kind of interested for a little while. I think they thought it was pretty cool that Greece were these huge underdogs that kind of came from nowhere and won the tournament. And then, just kind of my own personal interest after I was telling them that, I was like, let's see what else is online about this, because I come across an article here and there, always when maybe the Euros come around, or sometimes you'd see a piece on an underdog team, winning a championship in football history. But what I realized very quickly was that there was such scant coverage of this essentially once in a lifetime feat by Greece. And, I thought that more than maybe like the few articles that we could find online about it. So honestly, it was really that day where after a couple hours of, just kind of scouring the internet, looking at a few things, I'm like, you know what? I'm like, maybe I'll do a longer piece for a website or a magazine about this. I started taking some notes. One thing led to another. Those notes started to accumulate. And I thought to myself, it would be really cool to kind of tell the whole story with some insight from people and whatnot. And maybe this could be a book. So it really started, like I said, innocently enough, just kind of basically down to the fact that in English, there was such little coverage of what I thought was a very big event in kind of football history, a very special sort of circumstance where a team came out of nowhere to win a continental title. So that was kind of the beginnings. Like I said, one thing led to another. The notes started piling up, the chapters started piling up. And I got quite lucky reaching out to a few publishers that showed some interest, and finally a book came out because of that.
Can you describe the research process and the duration to write this book?
Yeah, so it was about a 3-year process. And, at the first, it was just, like I said, on the internet. I can speak Greek, so we were kind of looking at old archives of newspapers and websites, trying to get kind of the feel of what was going on back in, around the 2001 mark. It was really kind of the birth of this team with Author and things like that. So it started there, and then it kind of gravitated towards getting my hands on as much Greek football history as I could, reaching out to federations, and I will say without any sort of hesitation that the Greek Football Federation is not a very good organization as far as communication goes and helping out somebody that was kind of in my shoes. They're just traditionally not considered a group that is too interested in kind of putting forth a lot of effort. It's more than just, helping out a journalist. It's kind of a tradition of not maybe pursuing things that would be of benefit to the national team and to Greek football in general. But yeah, going through a lot of Greek football historical texts and books. And then after that, after kind of amassing a foundation of being able to tell the history of Greek football and the national team, we then transitioned to trying to talk to some of the players involved and experts, journalists around Europe, in Greece, anybody that had covered Euro 2004. So yeah, it kind of went from one very simple, maybe about a month or so of searching through the internet. Then it was kind of to more bigger volumes of Greek football history, which there's some great books out there. And then talking to some of the people that were closer to that time period, closer to the team, and then putting it all together and trying to make a story that paid tribute to this phenomenal sort of underdog achievement.
Can you name some of the people that you managed to interview for this book?
Yeah, so I talked to about half the players, with about full interviews with about 6 or 7. So some of the more notable names from that time period in Greek football, as well as part of the team: Stelios Giannakopoulos, who spent a few years at Bolton, which I'm sure a lot of followers of the game will remember; Nikos Dabizas, who was at Newcastle for a time period as well; Kostas Katsouranis played for Benfica; Yorgos Karagounis, who ended up being one of the kind of more historical figures of the national team, the all-time caps leader, played for Inter Milan, also for Benfica; Yannis Topalis, who was the third choice keeper, but just a treasure trove of information from somebody like that, who kind of was the kind of stand-in photographer for this team, and really somebody that he ended up being. It was funny about this team. There were only 2 coaches brought to Euro 2004, Author and Yannis Topalis, who we'll talk about, the assistant coach. There was no set goalkeeper coach, fitness coach, things like that. So a player like Gregorius, who was a third choice keeper, ended up putting together a lot of the sessions for the keepers. And to this day now, he is the national team goalkeeping coach. So it's just kind of funny how his trajectory from a player like that. But he had a lot of inside knowledge. There was also Yannis Topalis, who I just mentioned, the assistant coach I was able to interview in-depthly. Vassilis Gagatsis, the Greek Football Federation president, spent some time speaking with him. And then a lot of journalists, both in Greece, the commentator for the Greek television that was covering the event had some amazing kind of stories close to the action, talking about being there in the stadium when history was happening literally right in front of him. And again, other journalists, very notable names throughout European football: Tom Kundert, covers Portuguese football, and a host of other names. John Julian Beer was kind of an expert on Otto Rehagel. He's a German journalist who I was fortunate enough to speak with. So there was a huge kind of list of names that I tried to reach out to and get as much information, and make this as relevant to the story as possible, getting kind of deeper than just what you'd read in an article. So it was great to talk to all of these individuals, both the players close to the action and the ones that were there maybe a little bit in a different role. But just a quick side note, like somebody like Kostas Katsouranis, who was a midfielder during that tournament, talking to me about what it felt like on the bus to the stadium. Just gave you goosebumps listening to somebody like that. And I think it just, hopefully was able to kind of enhance the story at the end.
Now, in general, was it easy to obtain these interviews?
It was not as easy, but difficult. As being a journalist kind of based in the United States, I was somebody that the Greek players had never heard of, really. They might have come across my name at some point, but not probably something they would have remembered. So I did have a couple of contacts that kind of led me and gave me a little bit of viability for them. But it was difficult. There was a few that didn't really show a lot of interest at first and then pestered a little bit more within reason. And, they kind of came around after seeing some of the work that I had already put together. So it wasn't easy, but obviously persistent pays off in these situations, especially if you're not a big name journalist. But I had to kind of persevere through it. I was like, you know what, if I'm going to talk about an underdog story and highlight that, then I've got to be an underdog journalist and kind of put the effort in to speak to these people. And to be fair, after there was agreement to speak with me, I mean, these individuals were phenomenal. The players, gave up a lot of their time to be able to kind of tell their individual stories. And it was just kind of a beautiful thing to be able to hear those firsthand accounts.
Up until the millennium, Greece had only qualified to the 1980 Euros and the 1994 World Cup. Can you summarize Greece's international performances up to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if we summarize it, I think the word that really first comes to mind for me is underachievement. This was a national team that had some really talented players over the course of time, not necessarily household names that most fans will know or even observers of European football, because very, very long time, Greek players didn't really move abroad. They stayed in Greece. So, but underachievement probably is the word I would use. There was close calls in qualifying for major tournaments. I think the 1970 World Cup comes to mind, where Greece was just a point away from making that competition. But historically speaking, time and time again, this is a team that just fell short, either kind of disastrously or just didn't have quite enough to kind of get to these major competitions. That changed, like you mentioned, in 1980. Iakis Zakis was a historic manager for the Greek team. He was also in charge of the team that went to the 1994 World Cup. So, and the performance there in the 1980 Euros was decent enough. But it was a national team that was always kind of battling against players who put club loyalties over the national team. And it was really the story of Greek football for a long, long period of time. The national team was always this kind of second-rate idea. The prominence always went to kind of the players that played for the big three, mostly of Greek football, the clubs which comprise teams from the Athens area, AEK, Panathinaikos, and Olympiakos. The hostilities between those sides, both on and off the pitch, meant that when players joined the national team, cliques were just easily formed, and putting together a competitive team to kind of strive for something more was just not something that occurred until kind of recent history. So, underachievement over that course of time from those first friendlies, like I outlined in the book back in the 1920s, really up until 2000. Greek football, especially at the national team level, has really little to speak of, despite, like I said, having a lot of historical players that go down in Greek history as being very, very top level.
What's the status of football in Greek culture and society?
Yeah, it's a great question. So despite, and especially kind of coming back on the question that you just asked, despite the fact that Greek football historically underachieved, it's always been the number one sport. It's always been in the blood of Greeks. It arouses passions like no other. In 1987, the Greek basketball team won the European Championships, and it kind of sparked this new era of interest in basketball, and it just propelled it to like prominence in Greek culture. But even that victory, even the excitement and the joy of defeating the Soviet Union in the final in Greece, while it kind of spawned a new era, a new generation of basketball fanatics, it never was able to usurp football at the top of the sport that Greeks kind of have always loved and cherished. So football has a special place in the heart of the Greek nation. it's been a struggle because, like I said, successes both at the national team level and at club level have been few and far between, but that has not stopped this country from loving the game, really, in my opinion, just as much as anywhere else you'll find.
Now, you mentioned this, but for anyone not familiar, can you explain the power and the rivalry of the top Greek clubs that you mentioned, the Olympiacos, Panathinaikos, and the like, and their effect on the national team and the football landscape in general?
Yeah, so these clubs are in Greece larger than life. Even people that aren't interested in football, they're just household names that everybody is aware of. The colors, the history of the teams, who is performing well in recent times and things like that. The finger is on the pulse of these clubs. Some of these clubs have their own, in all of these clubs, the three that you named, traditionally have had their own newspapers, periodicals, and things covering just the team, focused just on the daily events of these clubs. So, the passion of their supporters, and it's a stereotype. Sometimes people will be like, well, yeah, you're going to go to Greece and play a match and it's going to be crazy, there's going to be flares and things, but it's so intense, and the support is so kind of full-blooded that over time it has created a sort of, I guess it's more than just a rivalry. Hatred has come about because of these situations. Some of that is to do with age-old problems in Greek football. Allegations of corruption, of hooliganism, and things like that have not helped the sort of ties between these different clubs or the supporters. Hardcore elements of these clubs have also kind of gained a life of their own. So trouble that's been caused between the the different sides of supporters, has only kind of made the rift between all three bigger as time has gone on. This impact, as you can imagine, on the national team has been huge. And in the past, there was an inability for the players to be able to distance themselves from that sort of animosity and distance themselves for the good of playing for Greece. It was not possible. The federation, the managers, and the players themselves all bore kind of guilt of being unable to kind of put those club loyalties aside. And again, I think that kind of tells a lot of the story of why Greek football, even though maybe the population in Greece is similar to some of these other European countries and even larger in some cases, but the game has never progressed to the level of, say, Portugal or even Belgium and the Netherlands. Now, obviously, if we delve into that, there's different reasons for that too. The way development is done, the amount of emphasis on promoting youth players and things like that. There's different ways to kind of look at it, but certainly the kind of vitriolic sort of feeling between the different top teams never helped Greek football progress, and especially the national team.
Let's go to the beginning. Can you describe the background and the process to select German manager Otto Rehagel in 2001?
Right around the time that Rehagel, before the time he was appointed, Greece was kind of in a very difficult period of time as far as the national team goes. A year or so before that, Angel Iordanescu, the Romanian manager, was appointed as the national team coach. And he came to Greece with a lot of expectation, having seen his success with the Romanian national team over the last few years. So there was high hopes that this foreign manager would come in and really get this team united and able to kind of punch above their weight. Unfortunately, his tenure did not last very long. Results didn't go as planned. He was quite upset at what some of the standards that he saw set up for the national team, as well as the organization of the federation. So he was out quite quickly. Greek manager Vassilis Daniil came in. This was towards the end of the Euro 2000 qualification campaign. He kind of tried to right the ship. He tried to get players to be thinking more about Greece rather than worried about bringing in the problems at club level and Greek football in general. Again, he did all he could. He was a veteran manager. I think when we look, historically speaking, when we look back on what he was able to do, it kind of helped set the foundation for Hagel to come in. But I think most observers believe that he wasn't also the long-term answer. So again, the federation had a tendency to go from kind of foreign manager to Greek manager, and it just kind of seemed the natural sort of course to go back to a foreign manager. So Rahagil was amongst a short list of three, which included Terry Venables and Nevio Scala. Vassilis Gagatsis, the president of the Greek Football Federation, always had his eye on Rahagil, something he said to me when I interviewed him. And in the end, that was the name that was picked. Scala was in the running as well. Venables dropped out, ruled himself out at one point. Scala was asking for twice the amount of money that Rahagil was asking. So the answer kind of came clear very quickly that the federation was going to go with Rahagil. That was kind of the process that led to him being appointed. He was an appointment that for seasoned kind of football supporters and observers, they met that with some optimism. For the rest, for the casual fan and things like that, he was not a name that inspired a lot of confidence that he would do much. But for those that had seen a little bit about what he had done in his career, there was hope that maybe Greece could turn the corner with him.
In your book, you name the Greek Federation president Vassilis Gagatsis as an important factor in this story. Can you describe him and his trajectory up to 2001?
Yeah, so Gagatsis was a football man. He was a kind of semi-amateur, semi-professional amateur player. In his younger days, he told me the story that he literally lived next to a football pitch. So he spent most of his young life just on the field. So he was always kind of in love with the game. He ended up becoming a lawyer, but even in that profession, never strayed far away from football. He was a lawyer at times for PAOK, for Iraklis, two teams from Thessaloniki, the second largest city in Greece, in the northern part of the country, and then at one point for Olympiacos. So he still, while being a lawyer, was able to kind of stay connected with football. He then became the general secretary of the Greek Football Federation at one point for years. So he worked very closely with Angel Iordanescu. While he really championed Iordanescu and was hoping that he would do well, the results, like we said, didn't come through. But he took a lot of Iordanescu's ideas about how Greek football could be improved, especially with the organization at the national team level, which Iordanescu thought was really substandard. And in Rahagil, Gagatsis found somebody that had the seriousness, had the pedigree that he believed could lead Greece to kind of a new era. And he was somebody that backed Rahagil to the hilt, even in times of criticism and when there was a real question of whether Rahagil would remain at certain parts. Gagatsis was ever present there supporting Rahagil. So there was this sort of symbiotic relationship that developed between the federation, the manager, and the players slowly. And Gagatsis did play a huge role in that. Another part to him is that he looked around Europe. He found inspiration from the Spanish Football Federation and other places in how he could kind of modernize the Greek Football Federation in the best way to help kind of support an improving national team.
Another important person in this story that many might not know about was Rahagil's assistant, Yannis Topalis. Can you describe his story and his importance?
Yeah, so in a story of underdogs, we're talking about Gagatsis, who was a semi-pro player that never really did much in football, but rose to prominence in this story. And Topalidis, the assistant manager, Rahagil's right-hand man, very similar. His family had immigrated to Germany. He also played semi-professional football. No real huge degree. He was a decent player for that level, but again, not a career path that was going to bring him to professional stardom and things like that. So he became a coach. His coaching career was decent enough, but it really only reached about the third tier of the German Bundesliga pyramid. He then, though, kind of latched on to a position where he was a scout for Hertha Berlin. And that was during the kind of late 90s when Hertha enjoyed some real success, where they finished, I believe, third, fifth, and sixth in consecutive seasons, made the Champions League, made the Europa League. And Topolidis became a scout for them and really was able to kind of make it to the top level of the game. He was in charge of scouting players. He was in charge of analyzing matches and things like that for Hertha. So, and that experience was vital for him, not only to get the job as assistant manager for Greece, but also to kind of really be like we said, Rahagil's right-hand man and do some of that same work for the national team. Rahagil and Topalis did not know each other. There was a mutual acquaintance that had told Rahagil about Topalis. Topalis got a call one day. He thought it was a joke. He said, I wasn't going to even answer the call. I didn't recognize the number. When the man started talking, I thought it was a joke. I didn't think it was real, but it was Rahagil on the other end. Said he wanted to meet in Berlin to discuss being Rahagil's assistant manager. This was soon after Rahagil was appointed. And, the two met, and Rahagil told him in no uncertain terms, he said, this is temporary. We'll see how it goes step by step. He's like, I'll bring you with me to the game against England at the end of the qualification for the 2002 World Cup. And we'll see what happens. Again, there was no contract or anything like that. It was kind of just like, hop on and we'll see if this will work. And over the course of time, they were a great match in the sense that they were both football pragmatists. They were realists. They both loved attacking football, but they also looked at their team and the opponent and tried to figure out ways in which they could play in order to find success on the pitch. They were not married to a philosophy necessarily. They were both really interested in analyzing who they would play, how they would match up. And you saw a lot of Greece during the Euro, but even before that, their tactics, their lineups, sometimes their formations, their strategies on the pitch. And Rahagil and Topalis just had a great way of kind of being able to bounce things off of each other. The last note I'll say about Topalis is he was the main translator, and it was very important. It sounds maybe something that's not as this was vital, but it was. Rahagil spoke in German. Topalis translated, but he translated it in a way, in I guess perhaps a softer tone sometimes, as he said, for the Greek players to be able to get the message. And when Rahagil called them gentlemen, he translated it into pedia, boys. The connection between manager and players was something that Topalis was able to bridge. And I think as we look back, assistant managers sometimes fly under the radar, but this was one that was of huge importance to this period of time and to Greece's success in the future.
What was the takeaway from Rahagil in the early part of his reign when he's seeing out the 2002 World Cup qualifiers, as well as his conditions to work in his early part of his tenure?
Yeah, so like I said before, there were certain parts of the Greek media, for instance, and the Greek media plays a big role kind of in the pressure that is exerted upon managers, especially at the national team level. There were parts that were very pro-Rahagil, willing to give him time, and there were others where after the first couple results, especially the first result, which we must mention, his opening match away to Finland at the end of the 2002 World Cup qualifiers, a complete debacle, a 5-1 defeat, and there was already a clamor then from certain parts of the media of like, this appointment was wrong. He didn't have a contract until a few months down the road, so there was this sort of belief that this was an older manager that came in to get a last paycheck in the sun. And however unwarranted that was a prevailing sentiment in some quarters. So it took time for Rahagil to win over the press. It took him to win over the Greek football public, even the players. Even the players, as they approached the second game of Rahagil away to England, there was comments made in the press from players of, we haven't really seen the manager that much. He's been in Germany. He only came a couple days ago, so we don't really know what to expect. So there was this real kind of beginning period of both sides being kind of tentative and not sure what the other was getting. Both Rahagil with his players, who he did slam after that 5-1 defeat, calling it one of the worst performances of his long career that he had overseen, and the players unsure about how long maybe this guy would be here. So there was a lot of unease at the beginning. Like I said, his contract didn't get signed until well after the 2-2 draw against England, which was a turning point in his second game. That was something that kind of placated people enough for him to be able to start to go about his work. But that 5-1 defeat and a bust up with one of the main players at that time, Gregorius Jados, I mean, there was a lot of questions swirling around this appointment and really, what it would be like, in the aftermath.
Yeah, and speaking of your gatos, you make a number of references in your book on the discarding of Gregorius Jados and how this was a way for Rehagel to stamp his authority. What can you say about this episode?
Was unfamiliar with Gregorius Jados. He was the probably top Greek player at the time, definitely the most recognizable on the European scene. He had signed for Inter Milan and kind of remains one of the higher profile Greek transfers of all time. Back then, it was by far the highest and the most expensive. He was a left back, a lot of talent, a lot of ability, and a really stalwart of the national team for a number of years. Hagel had asked him to play as a wingback in that Finland match, his first in charge, and Jorgatos' reaction was, say, not so kind. Back then, there was a player, before Topalis kind of came on board, there was a player named Kostas Konstantinidis who spoke German and Greek, so Hagel was using him as the translator, and Konstantinidis didn't really need to translate Jorgatos' reaction for Hagel. He saw that and then the ensuing performance, I believe, and realized that this was not a player he was willing to build his team around. Now, Rehagel had form for this. In his career, he had no hesitation in axing the star player. He was always somebody that put the good of the team over one individual. And if that individual was unwilling to kind of be a team player, Rehagel had no use for them. He showed this over the course of his career time and time again. And really, for him, Jorgatos was a problem that was not something that he wanted to deal with. As talented as he was, as good of a player as he was, and that was the start of him kind of instilling a different sort of discipline that really the Greek national team lacked for a long time. We'll say that maybe he didn't give him a fair shake, but really, I think history says that the mold of the team that Rehagel was trying to build didn't fit characters like Jorgatos.
He also installed Nikopolidis as his starting goalkeeper and dropped Eleftheropoulos when he took charge. And also, he convinced stars like Demis Nikolaides and Kasapsis to return to the national team. Also, Rehagel, he was also very critical of the training facilities and the accommodations for away trips and things like that. So he made sure that these things were also taken care of while he was in charge.
Yes, absolutely. And a couple of the stipulations when he agreed to sign his contract was that the national team needed a place to train. They were going around from stadium to stadium, kind of around Athens normally, trying to find places to train ahead of matches. And he thought this was not something that was up to standard of anywhere, especially at the European level. So that was one of his stipulations. The other was that players deserve bonuses for big victories. He said that's something that will help drive them. That's something that they can, an additional reward for a job well done. And he had a huge problem with away trips. Usually the contingent for the national team was massive. A lot of hangers on, a lot of officials there that Rehagel thought were unnecessary, were just a distraction to the players that had gone there to do a job. So very early on, he made it very clear to Gagatsis, the president, that these issues needed to be sorted. And Gagatsis, to his credit, I think had heard similar from Iordanescu, the previous Romanian manager for Greece. Those changes were made soon after. The team that was traveling was the team. It was just the players and a couple coaches, and that was really it. And I think for Rehagel, this was the installation of professionalism. This was the foundation for, if we're going to succeed, then we need to do things in a modern way. We need to do things the right way and not what had been traditionally done over the course of time for the national team.
What were Rehagel's tactical innovations upon taking over and its evolution into 2004?
Has been branded as a disciplinarian, as this kind of rigid coach, but it's really an unfair assessment of what kind of manager he was, because on the one hand, he was very close with players. He would try to get to know them. He'd try to support them and things like that. Once you gained his trust, Rehagel was going to repay that squads by having you on the field. As far as tactically and how he kind of changed Greece, There's a few different things we can look at. One is he was very flexible as a tactician. He sometimes played in a 4-4-2, sometimes it was a 4-5-1 or 4-3-3. He was very, very willing to change course in matches, to shift that formation. He was no stranger at all to early substitutions. I mean, there's several times over the course of his tenure with Greece where he's made substitutions before halftime. He was very much willing to read a game and act accordingly. So I think that was something that was kind of new. While he did show trust to players, if things weren't going well for half an hour, he was willing to shake it up. So, that was something I don't think in Greek football we had seen at the national team level. It was the stars that would play and then whatever would happen after that. So he didn't see it like that. A lot of big name players would come off, yanked at halftime or after an hour in order to kind of change what was going on in the field. Besides that tactical part, besides his flexibility, his ability to read matches, it was the mentality that he installed that was most important for Greece. This was a team that started to chase results in friendlies. They would play to the end. You saw comebacks from 2-0 down to win friendlies 3-2. You saw teams that would give up a goal early but would not hang their heads and fall apart. It was this sort of level of commitment he was asking for, an expectation of playing the full 90 and being able to kind of look back on it with some sort of pride, regardless of the result. And he instilled that in this team, which up until that point, I think we can honestly say they did not possess. For all their kind of talent and quality at different levels, they were unable to be a team that you'd trust to kind of come back in games or to kind of make sure that, we have these two friendlies coming up. We have to make sure they count. That mentality was lacking, and he instilled that in this group of players.
Can you present the backbone of the Greek side at his disposal?
Yeah, so over the course of time, this was a manager that began to really trust certain players. You mentioned Andonis Nikopoulidis as his main goalkeeper. He played the majority of matches under Rahagil. He showed steady hands. He showed a real consistency at the back. He did really evolve as a leader during that period of time. So Rahagil kind of trusted him. That was probably one of the first names on his team sheet. But then certain players came to the fore for Greece that maybe hadn't played consistently for the national team in the years before. So Traianos Delas, a defender. Then players like Georgios Karagounis really came to the fore during Rahagil's early years. He really trusted Karagounis to help Greece move the ball. He loved his energy in midfield. Angelos Charisteas up front, again, was a player that was in and out of squads, wasn't always first choice. Rahagil really trusted him. He loved the fact that he had played in Germany. So he was a player that he really started to kind of start really, really consistently. There's players that he brought back into the fold. Like you said, Demis Nikolaidis had retired from the international game, just really upset with all the politics and kind of the low standard that he saw of the national team. He brought him back. He was a player who was kind of coming towards the end of his career, but he did help kind of pull things together for qualifiers. And even during the Euro, he contributed. Stelios Giannakopoulos, like we said, a winger of just creative enough to be able to kind of get past his marker and get crosses in. He could score goals, but he was a workhorse. And Rahagil loved players like that. He loved players that were willing to work for the team. So these are the kind of core players he really began to trust. Over the course of time, like I said, he was not so rigid in not bringing new ones in that he believed could help. And we saw with players like Saitaridis, the right back, that was phenomenal during the Euro. And even Zagorakis, the captain, somebody that just became installed as a stalwart that maybe before, I played for the national team, but didn't really star.
Now, at this point, we're living just a few short years after the Bosman ruling. How important was having Greek players playing abroad?
Oh, it was huge. We're looking at, over the course of the football history, only a couple of Greek players have gone abroad. Nikos Anastopoulos won, one of the all-time greatest scorers in the national team as well as Greek league history. But they were few and far between. There was not a desire to have Greek players. The national team never really did much to kind of get a lot of attention, to have clubs looking that way. At club level, again, like we said, Greece has never been super successful. So But the Bosman ruling kind of changed everything. All of a sudden, clubs started to see cheaper players from countries like Greece and were willing to give them a shot with less risk. More foreign players were allowed to play on clubs. So that just kind of opened the borders for the Greek players. And it was huge because, like we said, it was kind of insular for a while. Greek players, they trained in Greece. The standards probably weren't anywhere near the level of the top leagues. And so as Greek players started to go out, they were exposed to a different mentality, philosophy about the game, the way you train, the way you take care of your body. All these things they brought back to clubs when they returned to Greece, or they brought back to the national team. So it helped raise the level of the average Greek player, and then in turn of the national team.
Let's discuss the 2004 Euro qualifiers. Greece are in a group with Spain, Ukraine, and these two are initially looked upon as the favorites from this group, as well as Armenia and Northern Ireland. It certainly did not start well. Can you go through this phase?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Greece would have been looked at as the kind of maybe third choice of these teams. Definitely Spain and Ukraine, top sides during that period. Spain traditionally, of course, one of European football's most successful teams. So yeah, Greece, unfortunately, the scheduling didn't do them any favors because they begin the qualification with a home match versus Spain and then an away game against Ukraine. They suffer 2 defeats right off the bat. They play well enough in both matches. So against Spain, the performance is not terrible. A mistake leads to the first goal. Greece have opportunities to kind of get back in it. They fail to convert. Spain scored a second to kill off the game. And then they go to the Ukraine. Similar story. It's a very cagey match, kind of driving rain. And they concede in the second half, and then they go down to a second defeat. You can imagine the Greek press swings back and forth from disaster to unbelievable achievement very quickly. So these 2 defeats now, and seemingly looking like Greece has failed in another qualification campaign. I mean, the knives were out and sharpened for Rahagil. But to his credit, Rahagil was just unflappable. This was a manager that lost a game once in Germany 12-0. This didn't faze him. And he spoke very logically in the sense that saying, these are 2 difficult teams. So we played 2 games, we lost, we still have 6 left. So we move forward. And so he didn't bring about the disaster. The external forces were trying to kind of portray it as such. He was still willing to work and still, I think, seeing enough growth from that group that there was optimism that maybe the tide could turn. He was probably one of the few people that would think that at that point. However, like we said, history tells a story, and he was right. Greece went on to win 6 matches in a row. They defeat Armenia in their 3rd game, and then Northern Ireland away, which is always a tricky game. And then comes June 2003, a repeat of the Spain and Ukraine game. Spain away first, 4 days later, Ukraine at home. And Yannis Topalis scores a goal against Spain, and Greece hold on for a famous win. And then in the 86th minute against Ukraine, 4 days later, Angelos Charisteas scores a massive victory, 6 points in 4 days that few people had tabbed them to pick up. And suddenly it all changed at that point. Obviously the Armenia and Northern Ireland games were important. You had to win those, but there was relatively few people that believed you'd pick up 6 points against the group heavyweights. And it all changed. The belief, the momentum of this team changed. And then it all remained was 2 victories in the fall of 2003 to clinch qualification and get to the Euro. So it was a magnificent turnaround. But again, credit to Rahagil because he brought this mentality, he brought a calmness and assurance that we don't need to jump back and forth between the 2 extremes. We lost 2 games. Let's see what happens in the next one. And I think the team took on that sort of outlook, and success followed.
What was the atmosphere at home following such a surprise qualification?
It's important, I think, to have a little bit of historical context to this. So the 1994 World Cup was the last tournament Greece had qualified for, and it was the debacle of all debacles. It was a team that was ill-prepared to compete at that level. A lot of infighting, a lot of external forces that were at play. the United States, and there was outings every night for different organizations, and the players kind of getting dragged around to different things. The focus really wasn't on preparing to play football. And the results that followed showed that. Losing to Argentina 4-0, losing to Bulgaria 4-0, and then the group finale to Nigeria 2-0. Failure to score in 3 games and conceding 10. It is one of the worst performances all time at a single World Cup. A lot of that trauma remained in Greece because there was nothing done at the national team level in the time from 1994 to when they qualified for the Euro in 2003 to kind of erase that trauma. And that had hung over players, coaches, everybody associated with the national team for a long time. There was a period of time where the national team was barely scraping 2,000 or 3,000 fans for matches, qualifiers. And so what this really did was put that to bed in some sense. There was a lot of elation, a lot of just relief, really is probably the word I would use, that finally we had come through a team that was capable of not embarrassing themselves in a major competition. And so very few people would have ever predicted what was to come. But I think the belief was something has been built here with Rehagel and this group of players that is sustainable, that is something that we can go to a tournament and have hopes of giving a decent performance.
Let's get to this new year, 2004. Let's look at some of the preparation friendlies ahead of the Euros. At the end of 2003, there's a friendly against the host Portugal at Aveiro that ends as a 1-1 tie. In February, there's a win over Bulgaria 2-0 at Athens. Late March, there's a win against Switzerland 1-0. But there's a heavy loss against the Dutch on April 28th, 4-0. After the final squad is selected, there are 2 final friendlies against Poland and Liechtenstein. Poland 1-0, but predictably defeat Liechtenstein 2-0. What was the general takeaway regarding Greece's form at this stage?
So up until the friendly against the Netherlands at the end of April of 2004, there was this real hope that we had built a side that was incredibly difficult to beat. Greece had gone on a 15-match unbeaten run, 18 months without defeat. And so there was a lot of optimism heading towards the Euro, thinking that, okay, maybe we're actually going to do something. And then came the Netherlands match, which was 0-0 at the half. Rehagel makes a series of changes, probably 6 changes, I believe, after halftime. And the goals start coming in, 3 goals, I believe, in 12 minutes. And then Pierre Van Hooijdonk scores right at injury time to really give a little bit more gloss to that score. But that was a sort of what many took as a warning sign, because suddenly the trauma we thought was pushed away from the 94 World Cup came back a little bit, because you're looking at one of the top teams on the continent and the level that you're going to be playing at in a short period of time, and thinking, oh my God, we got destroyed by the Dutch. I typically remember my uncle telling me, he asked me a question. He goes, you know how it's going to go for Rehagel at the Euro? And I said, how? And he goes, 4-4-2. And I said, as the formation? He goes, no. He's like, 4 against Portugal, 4 against Spain, and 2 against Russia, and we probably won't score. All these feelings from 10 years ago and how bad it went came back with that defeat in that friendly. I think it's important to look at some of the quotes some of the players had after that match. And Gregorius, the captain at that point, had said, we didn't play very well in the second half. We gave up goals we shouldn't have. It's a reminder that we need to be focused and concentrated on our task. But we'll learn from this and we'll move on. And Rehagel was kind of a similar tone. And the players very measured in their response to this defeat. The media latched on to the loss against Poland as well and say, okay, here we go again. Now we're starting to lose. This team has lost a little bit of the swagger they gained. But I really feel that those close to the team, the players, Vassilis, even the federation, I don't believe that they were thrown too off track by that result. They had done enough building that team over that year and a half that they thought they could still go to Portugal. And
now, ahead of the Euros, there was clamor to include Iakis Zakis who was having a good season at Monaco, but Rehagel stood firm. How was this viewed at the time?
Yeah, there was a lot of calls for Zakis to be included. This is a player that played in the Champions League final in 2004 for Monaco. So for a Greek to be playing at that stage of the season was a lot of questioning of like, why wouldn't we have this player here? I think there was a couple of reasons for that. Topalis even was a little bit at odds with Rehagel when it came to Zakis. He said he kind of begged Rehagel, is like, let's please go watch him again, give him another chance, and things like that. So Rehagel did. He went. He'd seen Zakis play a few times towards the end of that season, and he just kept on coming back to Topalis, saying he's like, he's a good player, but he's not more special than what we have. These are the players I trust, and I don't see in him somebody that can raise our level. Another thing to note is that Zakis had played for Rehagel before. He played in one of the early friendlies under the German manager against Cyprus, kind of soon after Rehagel was installed as manager. And he showed a poor attitude towards the end of a game when Rehagel called him up to go on about 5 minutes from time for Zagorakis, another defensive midfielder. And Zakis refused. He refused to go on. It was too late in the match. He didn't understand the reasoning. Rehagel spoke with him a little bit more, finally kind of convinced him to go on the field. So he went on a couple minutes later. This ended up being now the 87th, 88th minute. But that is, once again, the discipline that Rehagel installed, the discipline that he asked for from players, the respect he felt was not there. That was the last time Zakis played for Greece. So I think while Rehagel was able to maybe get past that in the sense that he would give him another chance, go view him again and see what his standard was, he was unwilling to finally make the call into the squad. And unfortunately for Zakis, at that time, Greece did have some good defensive midfielders. There was Zagorakis, there was Tsitsonis. There was even another player, Iakis Zakis, who didn't make the squad, who was also in pretty good form, that there was a lot of speculation on whether he would get brought in. And Rehagel, at that point, I believe, had formed the team in his head, and those players just didn't fit as part of his plans.
Can you discuss the dispute between Sartas and Nikolaidis stemming from the financial situation at AEK that threatened their participation in these Euros?
The club of both of these players, Nikolaidis actually was trying to save the club from oblivion. He was willing to kind of be part of an ownership group that would create conditions where AEK could be saved. Sartas was a player for AEK at that point, and he took issue with the demands that Nikolaidis and these group of investors kind of had laid out, which was for the players to take, I believe, a 30% cut in their wages. And these were players who had already gone many months without being paid. Because of the way it was presented, fan groups took issue with the players unwilling to kind of come around and help save the club. There was a kind of massive episode at AEK's training ground where fans ended up attacking players. In the end, this gained a lot of coverage around the world. CNN covered this and other outlets of what happened. But what happened as far as the national team is concerned is Tsartas began to speak out against Nikolaidis because he was feeling that he had set the stage for this to happen. So there was suddenly, from kind of calm waters, there was an animosity that grew between two important members of the team, of the Greek national side, going to the Euro. Rehagel had to step in personally for this because there was a lot of fear that this would create, once again, the rifts of the past, the going back to where problems at club level seeped into the national team and disrupted what was going on in an environment that had been kind of free of that for about a year and a half. Luckily, Rehagel's intervention ended up kind of calming this, what could have ended up being something that would have ended up much worse. And credit, though, to Tsartas and Nikolaidis because they were kind of able to put this to the side. The AEK and what happened after that, there was differing viewpoints as to how the club should be managed, how they should be saved. They were willing to put this away to the side for a couple of months to concentrate on the national team. So, and I think a lot of this was thanks to what the national team had become. They had become a united group of players. They had become more of a family. And so there was a protection was wanted to keep this stuff from infiltrating. And luckily, it was something that didn't have kind of further implications for the national team going into the Euro. There was a fear of it, though, at the start.
You in life at this point, and how did you experience the Euros?
So I was living in the United States at that point, and I was lucky enough to be the ESPN SoccerNet fan correspondent for the Euros. It was kind of my way of keeping tabs, writing with Greece's journey. I lived the game like a lot of Greeks, watching it with family and friends. It was a roller coaster. It starts slow as you're kind of going up. You're not sure what you're going to expect, but at the same time, we never thought this roller coaster would hit the heights that Greece's journey would kind of take us on. And that kind of grew match by match, and the celebrations and the kind of we were just incredulous. We were so many family and friends watching matches together, not believing what we were seeing, writing articles that, I was like, maybe I'll last a week and a half here until Greece is out of the group stage, but I get a few pieces in and maybe talk to some people that are interested in the national team. And that just grew and grew from a couple emails that were sent back and forth from some fans to, I believe, after Greece won the final. And I checked my inbox that next day, 1,300 emails from people around the world. So, yeah, it was just kind of living that out, like I said, in the States with family and friends in front of the television and just trying to, and then seeing the celebrations on Greek TV and being like, it must be so amazing to kind of be over there. But talking to family in Greece, cousins and aunts and uncles and other friends, and just them trying to explain the unexplainable, and just the kind of crazy celebrations that were happening in the aftermath of every Greek match.
This may be impossible for some people to believe, but I don't believe they were televised in America. I think it was pay-per-view, if I seem to remember, right?
Yeah, it was pay-per-view. You had to buy a package that was mostly through like British television. That was, I think the BBC was covering it. So you were getting all the BBC telecasts. Yeah, you had to pay to watch the matches. So yeah, just something we kind of take for granted now with so much football on television here. But back then you had to make plans to get this on your set. It wasn't just kind of turning on whatever app or channel to get coverage.
Let's look at the final 23 players selected by Rahagol for these 2004 Euros. At number 1, you have the starting goalkeeper Antonis Nikopolidis of Panathinaikos. At number 2, you have Yurkos Seitaridis of Panathinaikos at right back. He would stand out in this tournament.
Absolutely.
At number 3, you have Stelios Venetidis of Olympiakos. At number 4, you have Nikos Dabizas of Leicester City in England, and he would be unused during these Euros. Number 5, in central defense, you have Traianos Delas of AS Roma in Italy. He would stand out during these Euros despite not seeing much action at Roma that season. We come at number 6, midfielder Angelos Bazinas of Panathinaikos, a central midfielder. Number 7 in central midfield again, Theodoros Zagorakis, the captain of the team from AEK Athens. And he would also stand out during these Euros. At number 8, at the left side of the midfield, you have Stelios Giannakopoulos of Bolton Wanderers in England. At number 9, forward on the right side, we have Angelos Charisteas of Werder Bremen in Germany. Number 10 in midfield, you have Vassilis Tsartas of AEK Athens. Number 11, we have Demis Nikolaides of Atletico Madrid in Spain, another forward. Number 12, you have backup goalkeeper Kostas Chalkias of Panathinaikos. And number 13, another backup goalkeeper, Theophanis Katergianakis of Olympiakos. Surprisingly, at club level, I believe Chalkias was starting ahead of Nikopolidis at this point.
He was. Yeah. It was a unique situation for sure.
Number 14, at left back, you have Takis Fisas of Benfica in Portugal. Number 15, up front, the lone striker up front, we have Zizis Frizas at Fiorentina in Italy. At number 16 in midfield, you have Pantelis Kafes of Olympiacos, who would be unused during these Euros. Number 17 in midfield, you have Gregorius Jados of Olympiacos, who would also be unused during these Euros. Number 18 in defense, you have Yannis Topalis of Panathinaikos, who also would not see any action in these Euros. Number 19 in central defense starter, you have Iakis Zakis of AEK Athens. Number 20 in midfield, you have Georgios Karagounis of Inter Milan in Italy. Number 21, the midfield pivot, just behind Vassilis and Gagatsis, we have Tsitsonis of AEK Athens. Number 22 up front, we have Dimitrios Papadopoulos of Panathinaikos. And number 23 in midfield, you have Vassilis Gagatsis of AEK Athens. We come to the Euros. Greece are in the same group with the host Portugal, Spain, and Russia in Group A. For the first match, they're playing against the hosts on June 12, 2004 at Porto. This is a Portugal that has a young teenage Cristiano Ronaldo, as well as the likes of Pauleta, Rui Costa, Luis Figo, Fernando Couto. It's the golden generation towards the end of its journey.
Yeah.
And they're managed by Brazil's 2002 World Cup winning manager, Luis Felipe Scolari. For Greece, we have the following lineup: Nikopolidis, Fisas, Delas, Kapsis, Seitaridis, Karagounis. He'd be replaced by Katsouras in the 46th minute. Bassinas, Zagorakis, the captain of the team. Giannakopoulos, he'd be replaced by Nikolaidis in the 68th minute. Haristeas, he'd be replaced by Iakis in the 74th minute, and Vrizas. According to France Football Magazine, this was a 4-3-2-1 formation. However, according to World Soccer, this was a 4-4-2 formation. We have to note that Rehagel installed Bassinas and Giannakopoulos to block Figo.
Mm-hmm.
Greece surprisingly would take the lead in the 7th minute. After Paulo Ferreira had lost the ball, Karagounis scored with a long-range shot. They would double the lead in the second half after Cristiano Ronaldo, of all people, fouled Seitaridis in the box.
Right.
And Bassinas scored from the penalty kick. And in injury time, Cristiano Ronaldo would head in Figo's corner kick from the left side. Surprisingly, Greece had defeated the hosts.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's amazing that there was a lot of sort of pride for Greece playing that opening match. But once again, a little bit of fear creeping in just before, because you're wondering, okay, you're playing the hosts now. Can't give up an early goal, because otherwise we're going to have history coming back to haunt us. And it couldn't be further from the truth. 45 seconds of the game, Greece have an attack where the ball comes through into the box for Haristeas. He swings and misses with a goal kind of at his mercy. And some of us are thinking, oh, that was our chance. That was our one moment there that we started so well and we got a chance early on, and maybe you're not going to get that again. But the Greek approach, I think, this is one of the better matches Greece played during that tournament. I think it was just one of those that was as close to a complete display as this team ever had. The pressing that the Greek side did really disrupted the rhythm of Portugal and their possession game. And I think just unsettled them so much. Obviously, the early goal then resulted, and that heaps pressure on the host. They don't want to go down to these kind of plucky underdogs who they're expected to kind of roll over. And certainly Portugal had chances here and there, but really Greece managed this game so well. Nullified all of these, like we had mentioned, these top players by the pressure they put on them, the covering defense that was ever present throughout this tournament. And I think you could literally see the belief grow from this team in the game, thinking that we're not going to settle for a draw. We can push on here. And Seitaridis' run in the second half proved that. You're talking about a right back getting forward that high. It was a team that believed in their ability to kind of spring counterattacks and get forward. And obviously Portugal puts on a ton of pressure at the end, but Ronaldo's goal is just not enough. The match ends shortly after, and cue crazy scenes from pretty much any Greek football supporter, obviously in the stadium, but also anywhere else.
Few days later, on June 16, they take on Spain, whom they have met in the qualifiers. Now, for this match, Vassilis is rested and Karagounis starts in his place. And also, Tsitsonis is tasked with marking Raul, the star of Spain national team. So for this match on June 16, again at Porto, for this match, we have the following lineup. We have Nikopolidis, Seitaridis, Kapsis, Delas, Fisas. He'd be replaced by Venetidis in the 86th minute. Giannakopoulos, he'd be replaced by Nikolaidis in the 49th minute. Zagorakis, captain of the team. Karagounis, he'd be replaced by Tsartas in the 53rd minute. Katsouranis, Vrizas, Aristeas. For World Soccer Magazine, this was a 4-4-2 formation for this match. In this match, Spain takes the lead first in the 28th minute when Fernando Morientes gave him the lead. In the second half, in the 66th minute, Greece would tie the match when Sartas sent a long cross from the right side to Aristeas on the left, who shot past Iker Casillas. And the match ended as a 1-1 tie. After this match, Spain manager Iakis Zakis said that he had never seen such a disciplined side. Other things to mention, Torrehagel actually attacked UEFA after this match for using black gold nets instead of the traditional white.
Yes, that's Rahagel really at his finest, I think. He was a kind of a quirky guy. Sometimes he would make mention of something that few others maybe had considered as a sort of big instance or whatnot. But yeah, I distinctly remember him talking about that. And yeah, and to be fair, it did look kind of strange when we look back on it. It's you're just expecting the white net there, not any other color. But again, you're playing against one of the top European sides, and Greece give up a relatively early goal. So there is a little bit of fear of, okay, if they score a second, then it's going to be very, very difficult to get back in this. And to be fair, Spain played pretty well. They had chances. This wasn't as complete a performance as the opener against Portugal. Greece were chasing a little bit more. But again, they did enough, I feel, if you watch this match, to just disrupt Spain enough, not to get super comfortable, not to be able to kind of have their way with the ball. And another instance of a match where Greece grows into the game. And I think really important in the second half is Rahagel's outlook. So he knows that this is a team now that needs to get a goal. And Tsartas is probably Greece's best playmaker at the time, and one of the best in its history, with a magical left foot, that he showed over the course of his career at Sevilla for a couple of years in Spain. And he was kind of one of Greece's wild card. This was a player that Rahagel would bring on late in games, especially in these tournaments, to kind of hope for that one moment of inspiration. And his ball to Charisteas for the goal is just sublime. He finds Charisteas in his path. And to be fair, Charisteas still has work to do. He's got to bring the ball down and then finish with his left foot, his weaker foot, past Iker Casillas. But it's a superb goal, and really inspired by Rahagel seeing, what do I have at my disposal here to try to get this result. And the hallmarks of the Greek team during that tournament, just tireless running, playing for each other, battling to the end, all there. And in the end, a point, just a massively vital point that nobody really expected them to get. And after 2 games, 4 points, again, ahead of the tournament, the belief was, what can we get out of Portugal and Spain in those first 2 matches? Can we get a point? Can we get 2? And then we'll beat Russia in the finale and maybe be able to squeak through to the quarterfinals. So, but to come out with 4 points in those first 2 games was really above anybody's expectations.
The third match is against Russia on June 20th at Faro. At this point, Russia is already eliminated. Greece kind of get quite a scare, actually, but thanks to their 4 points that they had in the bag, they're able to qualify. But for this match on June 20th, Yiannakopoulos would miss this match through injury, and Karagounis was also suspended for this match. So Bassinas is back in the squad. Rehagel makes some changes. The left flank, he started with Venetidis and Papadopoulos in place of Fisas and Yiannakopoulos. The tactical formation is, again, it's considered to be a 3-4-3 per France Football, but a 4-3-3 by World Soccer Magazine. For this match, Greece starts with Nikopolidis, Seitaridis, Kapsis, Venetidis. He'd be replaced by Fisas in the 89th minute. Haristeas, Katsouranis, Zagorakis, the captain. Bassinas, he'd be replaced by Sartas in the 41st minute. Papadopoulos, he replaced by Nikolaidis in the 69th minute, and Vrizas. Russia scored what was at the time the quickest goal in tournament history. After 65 seconds, Kirichenko picked the ball outside of the box and just advanced to score. They doubled the lead in the 17th minute through Bulikin. He had it in a corner from the right side. Greece pulls a goal back in the 43rd minute when a cross from the right side was headed by Papadopoulos towards Vrizas on the left, who shot and scored. I think the takeaway is probably the tactical reshuffle may have affected Greece in this match.
Yeah, I think the changes made there probably disrupted the rhythm that the team had built over the first two games. I think there was reasons for the changes. Fisas had a great tournament, but his match against Spain was not his best. He struggled. So Venetidis was put in his place for Rehagel as a hope to kind of put some fresh legs in and things like that. But again, the other changes that were necessary to make in the midfield and an attack probably also played its role in Greece having a sluggish start, probably the pressure as well. Suddenly kind of playing relatively loose as far as nobody's really expecting much from you, and then you're in a position to advance to the quarterfinals, the knockout stage of a major tournament for the first time in your country's history. I think all that played a role in Greece's slow start. And the midfield trio, all good players, but without Karagounis, you don't have a player naturally suited to hold the ball. So I think that's why we see Tsartas coming on so early in the 41st minute. Rehagel gets him on kind of quickly to try to change that. But it was a very poor performance to start that game defensively. A team out of sorts, nervous. And Russia, again, they had already been eliminated. They were playing with kind of zero pressure. But they gave a decent account of themselves in the first two matches. They were in both those games. If we go back and watch them, they're not played off the pitch or anything by Spain and Portugal. So they were a decent side. So it was no surprise, really, that they were able to kind of give Greece trouble. The thing that I remember most about that game is late on, just a couple minutes from the end, a cross comes in through the Greek box and Kirichenko scores the first goal, is literally millimeters away from sending it into an open goal. Misses, the ball goes out to the other side. Greece hold on in terms of keeping the match at 2-1. They were tied on goal difference with Spain with a 0 goal difference, but Greece ended up advancing due to a better attack. They had scored 4 goals to Spain's 2. That goal, if it occurred, if Kirichenko puts that in, we're not having this conversation right now, and history is written in a different way for football in general and obviously for Greek football. So to understand that, I think when we look back on any time a team wins a tournament, it's very rare that we don't find those 1 or 2 moments maybe of a little bit of good fortune or luck that helps kind of swing the tide their way. And Greece had that in that moment. I mean, if you watch the highlights of that, Kirichenko is so close to that ball. It's just crazy. And that would have been a difference between Greece being out and obviously advancing. So yeah, overall the performance was poor, but in the end, it took a second or two to kind of to be sure that they had advanced, and then the celebrations were wild, and it was disappointing to lose, but in the end, Greece qualified for the quarterfinals, so the whole country was just kind of reveling in that.
For the quarterfinals, they would meet France at Lisbon. Now, this is a France that includes some of the 1998 World Cup winners and the 2000 Euro winners, the likes of Zinedine Zidane, Thierry Henry, Lizarazu, Thuram, a star-studded team. They will be missing Patrick Vieira and Willy Sagnol through injury for this match, though. As far as Greece, they would start this match on June 25th with the following lineup: Nikopolidis, Seitaridis, Kapsis, Delas, Fisas, Karagounis, Katsouranis, Zagorakis, Bassinas, he'd be replaced by Tsartas in the 85th minute, Nikolaidis, he'd be replaced by Lakis in the 61st minute, and Aristeas. I believe Nikolaidis started because Vrizas was suspended for this match.
Yes. Yeah.
This match, in a way, would be the match that would give Greece the confidence to win these Euros. In the 65th minute, Zagorakis crossed from the right side and Aristeas headed in the winner. France were out and Greece were through to the semifinals. So do you think this was the match that kind of gave an indication that they're the real deal and they can win?
Yeah, for sure. Playing against some of the bigger names in world football, obviously a legend like Zidane and Thierry Henry and all these other players who had won World Cups and been at the top level, both for club and country, to have come through that match and defeated a team like France, who probably at that stage was one of the favorites, because in the group stage, the likes of Italy, Germany, Spain had all crashed out. So you're left with teams like Portugal, France, Netherlands as the favorites now that were merged as the knockout rounds began. So France definitely at the top end of people's choice of winning this tournament. To the fact that Greece was able to defeat them and go through, I think turned it from like, this is kind of a nice story that we're part of, to who knows, now we can go on, we can push on here. And I think you talk to some of the players, as I was fortunate enough to, and they relay kind of similar sentiments. You know, they really believed that after that, this was something now that they could chase. You know, this was a viable goal to with only 2 matches afterward to win this thing. So I think what's important to note in this match too is Rahagil's masterclass as far as setup, employing man marking pretty much all over the pitch. And this did a couple things. One, it challenged these French players individually, and it took the game from how will we play to trying to create beating your individual kind of defender or person you were up against. And I really believe that kind of just disrupted France in the sense that it changed how their approach was. But really, it showcased Rahagil's trust in these players. It showed that I trust you to mark Zidane. I trust you to mark Thierry Henry, Pires, and all these other players, that all over the pitch, there was these individual battles that really helped to dictate this game. And after coming through the first half 0-0, even for us supporters, I think there was just this belief that this something could happen here. I remember listening to the British announcer saying quite clearly, this seems like the start of something strange brewing here today at halftime. So I think that the belief started then. After the first 10 or 15 minutes passed and these players seemed like they could match up. After that, it was just a matter of continuing what they had started. The goal is a sublime goal. Zagorakis kind of all over Lizarazu on the right, wonderful little touch, and then measures his cross, and Aristeas, just this wonderful snap header. He's unmarked in the box, and I think, it was definitely the starting point of Greece and their players believing in something more than just good showing at this tournament.
For the semifinal, they faced the Czech Republic, another very good team that includes the likes of Pavel Nedved, the Juventus star, Tomáš Rosický, Karel Poborský, the giant Jan Koller, among others. They were seen as a favorite for these Euros as well. This semifinal is on July 1st at Porto. For this match, Greece starts with this lineup: Nikopolidis, Seitaridis, Kapsis, Delas, Fisas, Bassinas. He replaced by Giannakopoulos in the 72nd minute. Katsouranis, Zagorakis, the captain. Vrizas, he replaced by Tsartas in the 91st minute. Bassinas and Karagounis. This match would go into extra time. In the 105th minute, Tsartas takes a corner kick from the right side and Delas heads in the winner. This would be the first and only match that was ended by the so-called silver goal, whereby if you score within the first half of the extra time, you play until the end and the match is over. That was scrapped later, of course.
Right.
But this was another 1-0 win and another header. And Greece were through to the final. So the adventure continues.
Continues, and it didn't look like it was going to continue early on. Greece faced a lot of pressure in this tournament from different sides. There was instances where Portugal and Spain and France were trying to score, and they had to kind of hold firm. But I'm not sure they faced the amount of pressure that they were put under by the Czechs early on in this match, who were just all over Greece. This was a wonderful attacking side with players in real form. Pavel Nedved, Milan Baros, Tomasz Rosický. You had backs like Jankulovski. It was a team that was just built to score goals. They were superb throughout this tournament. And it looked early on that Greece was not going to be able to handle the sort of different facets of attack, which, the Czechs were able to come at you with. But they rode that storm early, and the Czechs had the unfortunate instance where Pavel Nedved had to limp off injured after about a half an hour. And as time went on, the tide kind of changed a little bit. Greece grew into the match more. They started to possess the ball a little bit more. And the Czechs missed again in the second half a couple big opportunities. Jan Koller, their tall striker, and Baros also missed carbon copy opportunities in good positions. But as the game kind of hit the end of regular time with the introduction of Giannakopoulos and Tsartas, Greece did well in the start of extra time. They had a couple chances early on, and suddenly again, you're looking at a team that they rode these difficult moments. They got through them. Like you said, the silver goal occurs with Tsartas on a pinpoint cross at the near post. And I've heard people, since that I've spoken with being like, well, maybe if the Czechs had another 15 minutes. But it's interesting because I remember talking to Kostas Katsouranis and him saying, like, we were so focused at that point that he himself did not even realize that Greece was going to win the game right then. He was like, I was so laser focused on what was happening that I'm thinking to myself, 15 more minutes, we got to play through to win it. He had temporarily forgotten the silver goal rule. And so he's like, that just showed to me, he's like, that my belief that even if we had to play 15 more minutes, we would have still come through that game. So yeah, silver goal, obviously, a unique moment in football history, but Greece scrapped through some of that game. But again, in the end, showed that they had enough quality to make those set pieces count, enough quality defending to be able to keep even a potent attack like the Czechs possessed at bay, and crazily enough, through to the final.
Yes, and the final would be on July 4th at Lisbon, and it was a rematch of the opening match of this tournament against the hosts Portugal. For this match, Karagounis would be suspended. So for this match, Greece starts with Nikopolidis, Seitaridis, Kapsis, Delas, Fisas, Giannakopoulos. He'd replaced by Venetidis in the 76th minute. Captain of the team, Zagorakis, Bassinas, Katsouranis, Vrizas. He'd replaced by Papadopoulos in the 81st minute and Haristeas. Just like the other matches, this time in the 57th minute, another header. Bassinas takes a corner kick on the right side and Haristeas heads it in. And that's the winner. And Greece enters history as a Euro winner, winning for the first time. Otto Rehagel actually became the first foreign manager to win the Euros. But imagine the celebrations at your home and in Greece.
Yeah, it was an incredible and surreal moment, really, is what it felt like. If ever I've lived a match, it's that one with, literally every touch of the ball, every pass, every kick, every shot, every tackle. You feel like you're physically going through it, where you're left at the end, your celebrations after a couple of minutes, you're feeling so exhausted because it's almost as if the whole country, the whole Greek kind of diaspora is playing in that match. I think we all lived the game in a similar fashion, and it was an incredible moment. And even, like, I think I talk about it in the book, the lead up to that game for me was so special because you're listening to reports of average Greek citizens who do not watch football. They do not care about club teams. They don't really watch Greece when they're playing, but this team had captured the imagination of an entire country, and people were invested, whether you liked it or not. My grandfather, for instance, that was living in Greece on my father's side, never watched football. He'd always say he was not interested at all in anything like that. And I remember talking to him at the end and him yelling, "We won it," and things like that. So I think there was a lot of stories from people that kind of were similar to that. As far as the match itself, I don't think it was a vintage performance by either side. I don't think Portugal probably played to their maximum level. Same thing with Greece. I think the first Portuguese match was one that they probably hit a higher level as far as getting forward and attack and things like that. But it was such a symbolic display of the teamwork and unity that had been built over the course of the last few years. And I think we look at the goal, which some people say was divine intervention because it was an angelos to an angelos, which is angel in Greek, is that name. But if you look ahead before the ball gets played out wide and Greece won the corner, I believe it's Stelios Giannakopoulos who tracks back into the top of the Greek box and makes a big tackle on a shot that is going towards the Greek goal. Greece win possession and the ball goes forward and they end up scoring seconds after that. But I think that was a play that just typified this team. He was an attacking player, but this was a team that grew to play one for the other. The person next to you is your brother now. They were no longer a player that played for AEK or Panathinaikos or Olympiakos or PAOK or anybody. They were family. This is how this team began to approach their work. They spent time with each other a lot during this tournament. The relations seemed to be at such a good level. And I think that translated on the field. You saw these were players willing to fight for each other, willing to sacrifice. I think Nikos Debizis said it best. He missed the entire tournament. He didn't play a single minute after suffering an injury against Poland in the lead up. He was able to kind of feature in the last couple games, but because the defense had been so solid, Rahagel did not want to tinker with that. And he said this was a team that put the we above the I. He's like, the whole bench, it didn't matter who was playing. We lived those games just like anybody on the field did. And I think if there was ever a time where I was kind of exposed to that in football, it was that team that showed that we're such huge underdogs, but really came together to produce something extraordinary.
Much like his Werder Bremen days, Otto Rehhagel was looked upon as the star of the team and not the players. Was this justified?
Yes, it was justified because I think without his direction, without his discipline, without the belief that he instilled in this group, this success would have not happened. This would have been a talented group that maybe did something at some point. I don't believe they would have won a Euro. I don't believe they would have had the success that they had going forward in qualifying for different tournaments and really kind of setting forth the golden era of Greek football between the years of kind of 2001 and 2014, where Greece were just perennial participants in major tournaments, only missing out on the 2006 World Cup in that time period. They had qualified for all the other tournaments and making the knockout rounds on a couple of those occasions. So you talk about the names. Most people are not going to remember the names of that Greek side, but many that saw the tournament will remember Rahagel. He became a larger than life character in Greece. And I really believe for those players who saw him as a father figure of sorts, as a person that believed in their abilities, he expected a lot from them, but he also trusted them. When you look at the way he inspired them in different ways to believe they can match up against some of these tiny teams and to beat them. And this is, again, all coming from a career steeped in taking similar unfancied sides and winning competitions. You know, he did so with Werder Bremen. He did it with Kaiserslautern. He saved many teams from relegation in difficult situations. In the early stages of career, he was called a firefighter at first because he could enter these situations and rouse up fallen on difficult times. Been through a lot. He tasted failure, but he also knew what it meant to find success, and that was to get everybody on the same page, pulling in the same direction. Without him, I don't think this achievement would have been possible. The players certainly were phenomenal during these few weeks, and they were talented. Probably underrated, but without Rahagil, I don't think this would have occurred.
Greece were credited for being an effective unit that could switch formations during matches. How important was this versatility?
Yeah, it was huge because I think if you look at, as I've watched these matches many times, if you look at them and kind of pick them apart a little bit, you'll see that once again, Rahagil does not stay on kind of one set way of playing, you know, whether it is pressing, which I think we had taken some of the pressing that we've seen from Greece in these matches and put them in the modern day game right now, where it's kind of very common. It would not look out of place at all. This was a team that pressed in moments very, very well together. That was important, but there was also times where he knew enough to lay off. It's like, okay, now we're going to sit back a little bit and soak up the pressure and see if we can hit on these counterattacks. You know, Greece scores on set pieces, on something they worked on. But in order to get set pieces, counterattacks needed to occur in order to get the corners to get into those positions, which I think was an underrated part of the Greek team during this tournament. They got forward very quickly. Were able to maybe not always have the bulk of possession, but when they did, the idea was, can we spring up the field quickly? So, you know, whether it was developing Delas as a libero sweeper type individual, employing man marking, going back to zonal marking. Rahagil was able, just a master at changing this up, at seeing what the game called for, at seeing what the opponent presented to you, and adapting in turn. So I think we talked about him being the star. The players trusted him. He trusted the players to carry out. So there was this kind of joint cooperation between the two sides, and yeah, his ability to kind of read games was vital for Greece's success.
There have been many comparisons with the Denmark of 1992, a Cinderella team unexpectedly winning a title. In these Euros, was this the last time that such a phenomenon has occurred?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can easily say that that's the case. I believe Wales in 2016 probably came closest to matching something like this when I believe they advanced to the semifinals. But since Denmark in 92, and Greece's success in 04, I don't believe we've seen a team so unheralded go through and win a tournament like this. You know, and Denmark's success was obviously they came out of nowhere. You know, the old story that they came off the beach because of not being in the tournament at first, and then due to the expulsion of Yugoslavia, I believe, entering the competition. You know, so that is an amazing fairy tale run in and of itself. Not necessarily needing to compare, but if we look at it, Denmark did possess some top players, well known at the European level, and they did have pedigree. You know, they had advanced far in World Cups. I believe in '86 where they had a good run. So they were no stranger to these competitions and getting through the knockout stages. But I think Greece's, the fact that they really came out of nowhere, that they had no previous history of doing anything like this at a tournament, kind of shows how long shots they were to do anything like this. And and I think that is something that hopefully we'll see again, but it is a very difficult achievement to replicate. We will see teams now, especially with the expanded Euros, that advance the knockout rounds and maybe get through that first round of 16. But it's tough to go all the way. We've seen that, and Greece's achievement, I think, kind of is going to be difficult to see again.
There were also accusations that Greece's tactics were anti-football. Was it a case of using the players at disposal to the best of their abilities?
Yeah, of course. I think, as we said, Ragil was a pragmatist. He has quotes, literally saying, if we had Messi, if we had players like this, perhaps, our style would be different. But in my personal opinion, to go as far as to say anti-football is for me crazy. I think we've seen, even in the Champions League, we've seen at other international competitions, when a team buckles down defensively and is difficult to break down, in many cases that gets lauded. When Italy won the World Cup in 2006, we talked about a resolute rearguard action and superb defenders back there led by Cannavaro, and I think rightly so. I don't there's nothing wrong with any style of play and what a team needs to do, especially at international level, to advance in competition. You're talking about club teams that do not get the same amount of time as club teams for preparation. So you are usually going back to your tried and trusted players and a certain way of playing. Now, Greece, having had no previous real history in tournaments, if you're looking at where the needle kind of pointed on the spectrum of defense and offense, yes, of course, it was more towards the defensive side. But to say it's anti-football, I think is crazy. It was a team that tried to get forward very fast. The counterattacking style suited them. It suited the players. And this sort of narrative started to come out after the France victory, where I don't know if it was a need to explain why this was occurring. That seemed like a good story at first, and now we have to put a label on it. But I just think it's kind of crazy talk. Having seen football all these years, there's obviously attacking sides that have won competitions, and there's defensive sides too. That in Greece, certainly a defensive side, but one that I think it would be unfair to label them as anti-football.
Circling back to the concept of this effective unit, as you mentioned, not many of the players are remembered as stars in the mold of a Van Basten, say in 1988. Was this really the case that they were bigger than the sum of their parts as a group?
Yeah, of course. I think it's very, very clear that not one player stood out against the rest, really. You're going through the lineups of these games earlier, and there is some chopping and changing occurring there, based on whether there's injuries or whether Hagel felt a need to change something for a particular match. What doesn't really get lost is the team's level. Yes, they dip a little in the Russia game and they hit some other heights at different times, but the strength really was in the collective. The strength was with the togetherness and kind of unity that this team showed and the teamwork on the field. So, yeah, you're not going to have this one individual performer stand out. There was obviously players that played very, very well during that Euro, that made the all-tournament team. Zagorakis named this player of the tournament for sure, but individually, he's not going to be ever remembered at the level of the top European players of all time. So the strength was the team.
But besides Zagorakis, if you had to pick out individual players, who do you think reached higher levels under Rehagel?
Yeah, under Hagel, I think there's a few key ones that we can kind of point to. One is Traianos Delas. I think we had mentioned earlier that he had not played much for Roma that season, but for Greece, he was, as Hagel named him, the Colossus. He was from Rhodes. He was known as the Colossus of Rhodes. He was well over 6 feet tall, but he seemed to play like he was 8 feet tall in that tournament. He read the game so well. It was really, with Hagel pulling him back a little bit more as a libero, it wasn't just the physical component that was a strength of Delas. It was his ability to read the game. So he was just constantly able to be in the right place at the right time for whatever balls came through. Under Hagel, he just shone. His partner in that defense, Vassilis Gagatsis, again, he was a very quiet player, and he's never really going to be remembered unless you're a Greek football fan, really. But again, a player in that tournament was enormous. He matched up against Jan Koller in the semifinal. He was giving up probably 6 or 8 inches and winning headers over Koller. It was just, for us that followed that tournament closely, it was just heroic play by a player like that. And then when you're moving further up the field, Zagorakis, like we said, superb under Rahagil, given a lot of responsibility as the leader on the field, as the captain. And he stepped up to the plate. He was the voice, and he was just a battler in midfield. Charisteas, he was never a prolific scorer. If you look at his career, he obviously had some good seasons where he scored some goals at club level, but he was not this prolific scorer. But in this tournament, you just felt like he was on, and Rahagil entrusted him. Sometimes he played out wide, sometimes he came more central. Regi believed him. And I think that's a common theme with a lot of these players. Once they were given this belief, once they were given consistent play, they repaid the faith in their manager. If we look further past players like Fisas and Saitaridis, they had good careers, but maybe not amazing in the sense that you're naming them as some of your top backs of all time. But in this tournament, they were up and down that field so often, giving Greece an extra element in attack and just very strong defensively. So these are all players, I think, that just kind of grew under Rahagil.
In Greece, was there a feeling that this was a one-off, or was there a feeling that they could build upon this?
Definitely right when Greece win the Euro, there's a feeling that we can keep going. The chant that came about after the Euros it was in Greek, but it translated to, in 2 years in Germany, bring us Brazil. There was this real feeling that something special had been created, and this team could kind of going and compete at the highest level. To be honest in saying that didn't really happen. Obviously, Greece didn't even qualify for that next tournament. There was a drop. However, if we look at it now, in hindsight, we see that for the next 5 tournaments after that Euro, Greece qualifies for 4 and makes the knockout rounds in 2 of them, qualifying for the quarterfinals of Euro 2012 and the round of 16 at the 2014 World Cup. So while nothing ever kind of came to the level of winning a Euro, there was a belief that something good could happen. I think the problem was we were all left deflated in the years that followed because Greece and the people running football in the country were never really able to build upon that success. It was a lost opportunity. The matters were complicated by the financial crisis that the country endured in the years to come, but there was a feeling of this one shining moment in Greek football history, and we weren't able to capitalize and do the right things to grow the Greek game.
Rahagil bowed out as national team manager. What was his status at the end of his tenure?
So in the time following the Euro, he was a manager not immune to criticism. And there was a lot of kind of calling for him to be sacked after the failure to qualify for the 2006 World Cup. There was this belief that it was time for a change. And to be fair, Greece almost bought into the anti-football myth in that the play over the next couple of years became very dour. So Greece's performance at the 2008 Euros was quite poor, very defensive in that opening game against Sweden. They were really content on just playing the ball back and forth across the defensive line. And they had lost a lot of the verve and the energy that typified their performance at Euro 2004. And so without really ever trying to get forward, they eventually conceded. They just weren't as strong defensively. So after there was this kind of drop in the level of the performance, there was a belief that it was time for Rahagil to go. He hung around. They did qualify for Euro 2008, and then they beat Ukraine to advance to the 2010 World Cup, in which he bowed out after they were eliminated at the group stage of that tournament. However, in the end, there was a lot of emotion when Rahagil left, because while he did face criticism, while he was never able to kind of have Greece have any run that was similar to Euro 2004, the fact that he turned the national team into a competitive side, able to qualify for major tournaments, able to have that magical summer where they won it, history really remembers him fondly. Even his detractors, I think, have enough respect for him to suggest that, without him, Greek football may not have entered that stage of success.
In closing, what is the legacy of this 2004 adventure in Greek football history, as well as culturally and sociologically?
The victory represents Greece's Mount Everest in football. There is nothing since then. There's nothing before that point that Greek football has ever hit those heights. Of course, now we have Olympiakos advancing to the final of the Conference League. But even if they win that, and hopefully they will do that for the sake of the supporters and the Greek game, that still will fall short of what Greece did that summer. So for Greek football, this is in a golden era, the golden moment of the Greek game. Culturally and sociologically, I guess, what I would say is this is something that Greeks will talk about. You'll hear almost on a daily basis, whether it's a team that is, of any sport that's advancing in a tournament, they'll sometimes refer to Greece winning the Euro and trying to take inspiration from that. It's looked at with such pride from Greeks everywhere, whether you were born in Greece or not. It is something that we all kind of still point to 20 years on now as such a special time, such a special achievement. And I think, for Greeks, we have such pride as a people. The financial crisis was a very difficult time for so many to go through. And we can't put football as such high importance to deal with, maybe with the daily struggles that people have. But I think we can say that what that team did was show that, when Greeks are united, when they are together and all pulling in the same direction, when there is a willingness to focus and concentrate on a goal and take it step by step, that there is this opportunity for success in all walks of life. And that team, in such an astonishing way, in such a kind of surprising and shocking way, as football goes, I think showed Greeks that, and it's something we still hear to this day, where it's reminiscing about that tournament, or, like I said, whenever any Greek side gets close to anything special, the Greek 04 side pops up as this special time in really the nation's history. Like I said, this was a victory celebrated by all people, all walks of life. You didn't have to be a football supporter to find joy in it, to find the pride in it.
With that, I would like to thank you for your participation in this interview. As always, feel free to leave questions and comments. Again, all our respective contact information and the link to Mr. Tsitsonis' book are on the blog and podcast uploads. A very good book that chronicles this journey we just discussed. So thank you once again, and hope to continue these discussions on Greek football history.
My pleasure, Sean. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it, and I always appreciate being able to talk about this kind of amazing story.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.